My name is Lila Harper, and at 27, my father stood in front of the whole family at our reunion, under the golden haze of lantern light in the old barn, and said, "We're selling the farm. You get nothing, Lila." My sister Tara clapped like she'd just won the lottery. Mason hooted and slapped Dad on the back, like the three of them had conquered something together. But the worst part? Dad didn't even look at me when he said it. If you've ever felt invisible at home, or if this story hits close to your heart, please tap like. It lets me know I'm not alone out here. Didn't blink, didn't flinch, like I'd never been his daughter to begin with. What they didn't know was the buyer paying $57 million for this land, that was me. They just didn't know it yet. How does a person go from being the family ghost, the one no one remembers in birthday toasts or Christmas photos, to the one holding the deed to their entire legacy? It started with the heat, the Kansas kind, sticky, sharp, full of gnats that swarmed near the lights. I stood alone at the back of the barn, where the floorboards creaked and the scent of hay mingled with spilled beer and barbecued ribs. Paper streamers sagged from the beams above, damp with sweat and humidity. Laughter bounced off the wooden walls, too loud, too familiar, the kind that's meant to include but doesn't. I'd always felt like a guest at these things, never a Harper, just Lila. Dad stood up near the front. The lantern beside him flickered, casting his shadow large across the barn wall, like some ancient preacher delivering judgment. His boots echoed as he stepped onto the raised platform we used to call the dance stage. Mom was nowhere, probably in the house, pretending not to feel anything. Tara and Mason leaned in like they already knew what was coming. "All right, listen up," Dad said, raising his arms. "It's time. We're selling the farm." A beat, then cheers. Someone near the front whooped, another clapped, and then, "Except Lila," he added, flat. "You get nothing, sweetheart." I didn't blink. I just smiled, the kind of smile that feels stitched onto your face, too tight at the corners, not quite human. Inside, my ribs were splintering. My throat burned from the whiskey I hadn't finished, but I kept that smile. Because what's pain when you've known it your whole life? Tara leaned over and whispered something to Mason. He snorted. I didn't need to hear it to know. She's finally cut out, probably. Or worse, she never belonged anyway. I took a step forward, heels clicking against the dusty floor. The air thickened as conversations dipped into murmurs. A few heads turned. Dad raised a brow. "Who's the buyer?" I asked, voice cool, quiet, almost curious. He straightened, puffed his chest like he always did when he thought he'd won something. "Green Acres," he said proudly. "They're paying $57 million. His words hung there, like the smoke curling up from Uncle Ron's cigarette. Thick, heavy, almost sacred. I felt my hand curl around the clutch purse at my side, not out of anger, not yet, just remembering. Remembering how he used to say I wasn't cut out for this land, that I wasn't Harper stock, that I'd be better off somewhere clean and quiet with air conditioning and computers. So I left. But not for comfort, not for escape. I left to build something he'd never see coming. $57 million, I repeated, lips curving into something that looked like amusement. "That's a lot, Dad." He nodded. "It is." And for the first time, he looked proud, not of me, just of himself. I scanned the faces. Most were smiling, some confused, a few indifferent. The kind of indifference that only comes from years of being told to stay quiet at dinner tables and family meetings. The kind that says, why bother standing up for someone no one else sees? But what none of them knew was that the check had already cleared. Green Acres was mine, had been mine, for the last 3 years. I'd built it from scratch, seed by seed, deal by deal. While they laughed behind my back and called me city girl, Dad turned to the crowd again, probably to start listing off his plans. What they'd do with the money, where Mason might go, what Tara deserved. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was watching his hands, big, cracked palms, nails stained with dirt, hands that once grabbed my shoulders too tight, that once slammed my report cards onto the kitchen counter and said, This is nothing that'll help this farm." I felt the weight of the contract inside my purse. I could almost hear it humming. They had no idea the bomb that was about to go off in this barn, but I did, and I couldn't wait to light the fuse. The barn was still buzzing, but my mind had already slipped somewhere colder, quieter, A place where laughter didn't echo like daggers and my name wasn't a punchline. I could still feel the press of the contract in my purse, but its weight now sat beside a different kind of heaviness, one I hadn't invited. The truth is, this wasn't the first time I'd been erased, just the most public. It started long before 57 million, long before Green Acres, long before I knew what revenge even tasted like. I was 12 when I first realized what it meant to be the leftover in a house full of chosen favorites. The attic of the old Harper farmhouse was the one place I could hide without being called lazy or dramatic. I'd wedge myself between boxes of forgotten Christmas decorations and moth-eaten quilts, the air thick with dust and insulation. The kind of silence that made you question if the world would even notice if you disappeared. One afternoon, sun leaking through a crack in the roof, I sat cross-legged with a photo album in my lap, its leather cover flaking like old skin. The pages smelled of glue and time. Tara in her new pink dress, Mason on Dad's shoulders. Me? Sometimes blurred in the background, sometimes not there at all. My fingers hovered over a page where Mom and Dad beamed beside Tara, a Christmas tree blinking behind them. That year, Tara got a mountain bike, Mason got a dirt bike, and I got a pat on the head and a chore list taped to my bedroom door. "You're not cut out for this farm, Lila," Dad said that morning, pushing a feed bucket into my hands. "You don't got the back for it, or the grit." I remember my hands trembling as I clutched the metal handle, not from the cold, from the way his words sank into me like rusted nails. But I never cried in front of him, not once. Instead, I went upstairs, to the attic, to the silence. That's where I found it, beneath a loose board by the far wall, where old suitcases leaned like tired old men. There was a box, wooden, locked, and carved into the top, faded but clear, R.H. Roy Harper, Uncle Roy, Dad's older brother, the one who vanished from family barbecues without notice, the one people only mentioned when drunk or bitter. The one I secretly liked, because he never looked at me like I was in the way. The box didn't open no matter how hard I pulled. No key, no latch, just heavy, like it had weight it didn't want to share. I dragged it across the attic floor and sat with it for hours, pressing my fingers along every edge. I knew it mattered, even if I didn't know why. That box stayed hidden. But the question it left behind, it never went away. What was Uncle Roy hiding from my father? And why did it feel like I was never supposed to find it? Later that night, over dry meatloaf and overcooked corn, I asked Dad if Roy was coming for Christmas. He didn't look up from his plate. "Roy's a waste. You don't need to worry about him." Mom flinched. Tara smirked. Mason mimicked Dad's grunt. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept eating. But something cracked open in me that day, and it never sealed back shut. Back in the barn, present day, someone bumped into me. Laughter, music, a little spilled beer near my heels. I snapped back into now, the heat suddenly too close, too loud. Tara twirled her wine glass like she'd already spent her inheritance. "Gotta admit," she said, grinning at Dad, "didn't think you'd actually pull the trigger." Dad chuckled. "Time to retire, kiddo. Let the money work instead of my back." And there it was again, his pride. Built on the idea that I was gone for good, that I'd never matter here. I felt my jaw tighten, not just from the lie, but because deep down, I still wanted him to see me, still wanted him to say, "I was wrong about you, Lila." Stupid. He never would. Mason came up beside me, beer in one hand, the other sliding into his jeans pocket. "So, you just gonna pout the whole reunion?" he said, tilting his head. "I'm enjoying the show," I said, voice low. "It's impressive how fast you all sold out." He rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on. You never even liked the farm." "Maybe I didn't like how the farm treated me." "Same thing," he muttered before walking off. I stood there, heart pounding, hands clenched so tight around my purse I could feel the metal frame press into my skin. They think I'm the weak one, the extra, the one they left behind years ago, and who just keeps crawling back for scraps, but they don't know who they're dealing with now. Still, as the night dragged on and voices rose, that old memory clawed its way back. Me curled in that attic, gripping a locked box I wasn't allowed to open, hearing the creak of footsteps down below, knowing I'd never be invited downstairs to laugh, to belong, and for a second, just a second, I almost felt it again, that same hollow ache in my chest, like I was 12, like nothing had changed, but it had. Now I held the power. I just hadn't shown them the proof yet. Outside, the night thickened. Fireflies blinked through the cornfields. A whip-poor will called in the dark. I slipped out through the side door, needing air. And then, a voice behind me. "You still hate this place, don't you?" I turned. Dad stood there, arms crossed, face unreadable in the dim light. I didn't answer. He took a step closer. "I meant what I said. You're not part of this deal. I heard you the first time. You always thought you were better than us," he said. "Always had your head in books and computers and dreams." "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped trying to impress someone who couldn't see me." His mouth opened like he might argue, but he didn't. He just stared. I walked away. The barn lights behind me flickered once, then held steady. My fingers brushed over the outline of the contract in my purse again. And that old question rose up in me like smoke from a fire I thought I'd buried. What was in that box, and why was I always the one left out? I didn't sleep after the reunion. Even after the barn lights dimmed, after the laughter thinned and the beer-stained wooden floors were swept clean, I lay in the spare room upstairs, staring at the ceiling fan's slow rotation. The blades clicked every third spin, steady, predictable. Unlike the storm building in my chest, they still saw me as the girl hiding in attics, not the woman who built an empire. I slid out of bed just past 4 a.m., the house silent but restless, like it remembered all the shouting, all the silences that came before. By sunrise, I was already halfway to Kansas City. I drove with the windows cracked just enough to feel the wind, not enough to mess up my hair. The highway stretched like a scar across the fields, and I couldn't help but think, this was always my escape route. Only this time, I wasn't running. I was returning to something I'd built with my own 2 hands. My office sat on the 8th floor of an old converted seed warehouse. Concrete floors, exposed beams, and windows that soaked the place in golden morning light. The scent of black coffee and fresh-cut paper hit me as I pushed open the door. Stacks of folders were already on my desk, crop data reports spilling out like stories waiting to be told. I ran my fingers along the edge of the desk, maple, thick, heavy, before finally sitting down. This was mine, not inherited, not gifted, built. I opened my laptop. A green screen blinked to life, the words Green Acres Holdings glowing like a secret finally ready to be spoken aloud. And then a soft knock. "Morning," Grace said as she stepped in, carrying 2 coffees and a look that always made me feel seen in a way my family never could. She looked older than when we first met, still sharp, still formidable, but the edges around her eyes had softened. Her flannel sleeves were rolled to the elbow, like she'd just come from checking soil samples instead of walking into a boardroom. "You look like hell," she said, smiling. "Family reunion," I muttered, taking the cup. She raised an eyebrow. "Was it as brutal as you expected?" "Worse." Grace didn't press. She never did. Instead, she handed me a manila folder. "New proposal, sustainable wheat hybrid, South Parcel." I skimmed it, then paused. "You remember when we first met?" I asked, not looking up. She chuckled. "You were 18, walked into my garden store with a 2-page pitch and mud on your boots." I was terrified. "I know," she said, "but I also knew you had something." Back then, I had no roadmap, just an idea. What if farmers could grow cleaner, faster, smarter crops without selling their souls to corporations who saw them as numbers? I'd worked nights at a diner for tips, typing business plans between shifts. Nobody believed in me, except Grace. She was the first investor, $10,000, all in. She told me to keep it quiet. "You talk about big dreams in a town like yours," she warned. "They'll bury you with them." So I stayed silent, built in shadows. Green Acres became more than a name, it became armor. We'd started with just 4 acres of test soil. Now, 4,000. 3 states, 6 contracts pending, all under a shell company. Because I knew deep down, if my name was on the letterhead, someone back home would try to burn it down, just to make sure I stayed where they thought I belonged. Grace sipped her coffee, her gaze steady. "You told them yet?" I shook my head. "They don't know it's you?" she asked. "No, not yet." She leaned forward, voice low. "Then keep building. Let them laugh. Let them count you out. And when the time comes, don't ask for permission. Just take the damn crown." I felt my throat tighten. She saw me, always had, more than my own mother ever tried to. But even as her words settled over me like armor, something inside twisted. That old attic ache, that box I still couldn't open. Why did Uncle Roy hide it? And why was I the only one who seemed to remember it existed? I opened my drawer and pulled out a file marked Farm, Legacy Parcel A. Inside was a list of every Harper land deed still active. One entry caught my eye, small, obscure, listed under Roy's initials, still active, still owned. Grace noticed the pause. "What is it?" "Just a hunch." She didn't ask more. She trusted me. Later that afternoon, I walked alone through the community greenhouse we helped fund last year. Sunlight poured through the glass panes, casting soft gold over rows of deep green leaves. Basil, mint, chard. The scent of earth and growth felt honest. I brushed my hand over the top of a planter. The soil was warm, the plants vibrant. Everything I'd built had roots. And yet my father still thought I was a girl who left to play with city dreams. He had no idea I'd funneled over $1 million into sustainable ag tech just this quarter alone, or that his bank had reviewed a financing proposal from Green Acres 2 months ago, without knowing who sat at the helm. As I turned a corner, a group of students walked in, high schoolers, part of our internship pilot. One of them, a girl with frizzy curls and a Green Acres badge on her hoodie, lit up when she saw me. "Miss Harper, I finished the hydroponics worksheet." I smiled. "Good. Tomorrow we build the frame." She nodded, proud, and ran off to join the others. I watched her go, feeling the weight of everything behind me. Every no, every dismissal. Every time Dad said I wasn't strong enough. Maybe I wasn't, but I was relentless. I pulled out my phone and opened the private dashboard. The latest quarterly growth graph flickered. Clean, aggressive, climbing. I stared at the name at the top of the page. Green Acres Holdings LLC, CEO Confidential. They'd never see me coming, but the clock was ticking. And somewhere in that locked attic, inside a box I never could open, was a truth I hadn't faced. One that might explain everything. Why Roy vanished, why Dad grew colder every year, and why, deep down, I never truly believed I'd be accepted, even if I won. I looked out at the sun setting over the greenhouse roof. It cast long, sharp shadows, just like the ones back home. 2 years ago, I came back to the farm in the middle of a thunderstorm. I wasn't planning on it. I hadn't called ahead. But something in me needed to see the place again, just once, in the dark. The rain was heavy, slapping against my windshield like it had something to prove. The sky cracked with flashes of silver as I pulled up the gravel drive. The barn loomed in the distance like a carcass, half lit by the occasional bolt. I killed the engine, waited. And that's when I saw him, Dad, standing under the porch light with a phone pressed to his ear, his voice cutting through the rain. "I don't care how much it costs," he snapped. "We're drowning here." I froze. My hand hovered over the door handle, heart pounding. Drowning? He sounded panicked, tired, like the version of him I'd never been allowed to see. "I already mortgaged the east parcel," he continued. "The bank's circling. If we don't cover this by end of quarter, we lose everything." A pause, then softer. "Clara can't know. Neither can the kids." I sank lower in my seat. My fingers clenched around the steering wheel, knuckles white. He wasn't angry. He was desperate. And suddenly, everything about his arrogance made sense. He was performing, pretending he still had it all under control, but the truth was bleeding out of him in whispers on a rainy night. I didn't stay, didn't confront him. I just left. But that night changed everything. Back in my apartment in Kansas City, I paced until sunrise. Could I really let him fail, after everything? Part of me whispered, yes, let him taste it. Let him finally feel what it's like to be powerless. But another part, the part that still remembered being 12 and begging for a seat at the table, wouldn't let me sleep, so I made a decision. Not out of forgiveness, but out of control. I pulled up the Green Acres accounts and transferred $200,000 into a shell holding company I'd set up months before, just in case. No paper trail, No link to me, just a silent lifeline. And then I sent the funds straight to the Harper Farm mortgage account. Untraceable, unspoken. Dad never knew where the money came from, but the farm was saved. For now. I told myself it was a strategic move, protecting the land, preserving a potential investment. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I still wanted his approval. I hated that I wanted it, but I did. Weeks passed. No one said anything. No one called. Until one Sunday afternoon, I got a voicemail. Dad's voice, lighter than I'd heard in years. "Looks like someone's watching over us. Angel investor came through just in time. Bank backed off. We're in the clear." He chuckled. "I guess some folks out there still believe in family farms." My hands shook as I replayed it. Not once, not twice, 12 times. He didn't know it was me, and somehow that hurt more than if he'd known and said nothing. I'd saved him, silently, and he gave the credit to some invisible stranger. It was like standing in that attic all over again, holding the locked box, wondering why nothing ever unlocked for me. But I kept my mouth shut. Let them believe what they wanted. Let them rest easy, because the more they underestimated me, the easier it was to move in the shadows. The next time I visited the farm, things looked brighter. The front fence had fresh paint. The sagging porch had been reinforced. Dad smiled more. Tara bragged about expansion plans. Mason mentioned new equipment. None of them knew they were standing on my dime. At dinner, Dad raised a glass of sweet tea. "To second chances," he said. Everyone laughed. I smiled, but something inside me went cold. That night, I sat alone in the barn. The same barn where 2 years later, he'd tell me to my face that I was getting nothing. That night, I still believed there was something worth saving. Still thought maybe he'd say thank you. Still hoped. I remember tracing the wood grain on the bench beside the hay bales. The scent of fresh-cut alfalfa filled the space. Warm, quiet, heavy with secrets. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Dad. He didn't speak right away, just sat down. "You've done well for yourself," he said finally, glancing sideways. I kept my face neutral. "So I hear." "Grace is proud of you," he added. My jaw tensed. "She's earned the right." He nodded slowly. "That she has." Then, "You thinking about investing out here?" I turned to him. "Why?" He shrugged. "Just wondering if your fancy company ever looks local. Thought maybe you'd want to do something real for once." My fingers curled around the edge of the bench. He didn't know. Still didn't know. That I already had. "You don't think what I do is real?" I asked. "I think you make good money," he said, standing up. "But around here, real work still means dirt under your nails." He left before I could answer, and I just sat there, trying not to scream, because that was the moment I realized, even if I handed him the whole world, he'd still think I wasn't enough. He didn't want to see me, because seeing me meant admitting he'd been wrong all along. But if he wouldn't look me in the eye, I'd force him to watch me take everything he ever cared about, and I'd do it with a smile. What they never understood was that the lifeline I gave them wasn't kindness, it was leverage, and now it was time to use it. It started with a voicemail from Tara. Her voice was sharp, rushed, like she'd just swallowed something bitter and hadn't quite managed to keep it down. "You're coming to the reunion," she said. "Non-negotiable. Dad wants everyone there. We need to present a united front. United front." I stared at the phone long after the message ended, the words echoing like some ghost of a time I never believed in. She hadn't called in months. Not after the holidays, not after the barn renovations, and definitely not after she'd posted that smug family photo captioned, "Built from legacy and love." Legacy and love. I almost laughed. I didn't call her back. I didn't need to. I already knew I was going, but not for the reason she assumed. I'd been waiting for this moment. And now, Dad was about to give me the stage. I sat on the edge of my bed, the Kansas City skyline stretching pale and distant outside my apartment window. Morning light crept through the blinds in soft gold slivers, slicing across the hardwood floor. The air was still, too still, like it knew a storm was coming. I reached down and unzipped the side of my overnight bag. Inside, beneath folded clothes and a worn denim jacket, was a file folder, thick, creased, and sealed tight. The Green Acres acquisition contract, finalized, signed, locked. My name wasn't on the front page, but my signature, buried in the fine print like a quiet revolution. I ran my finger along the edge of the paper, slow and steady. I didn't just want to prove them wrong anymore, I wanted to leave them speechless. A soft ding interrupted the thought. A text from Mason. "Dad's selling. Get ready to lose." I read it twice, then locked the screen. Of course Mason would gloat. He'd always been Dad's echo. Say what the old man couldn't. Laugh when I stayed silent. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, but didn't drink it. Just stared through it, the distortion of light turning my reflection into something unfamiliar. Get ready to lose? I smiled. I'd been losing my whole life, quietly, obediently, without protest. Until I stopped. And now, I wasn't coming home to watch them divide the farm. I was coming home to reclaim it. That night, as I packed the last of my things, I stumbled across an old photograph shoved between two books. The four of us, me, Tara, Mason, and Dad, standing in front of the north silo. Dad's hand rested on Tara's shoulder. Mason had dirt on his face and pride in his eyes. I was standing off to the side, half-shadowed, eyes turned to something beyond the camera, forgotten even in a staged memory. I held it for a long time, thumb brushing over the edges. And I remembered the way Tara used to call me visitor under her breath, how she'd remind me I didn't fit here, that I was too quiet, too soft, too separate. They built walls around me long before I ever left. And now I was walking back through those same doors not as a guest but a storm in disguise. I arrived 2 days later. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped out of the car. The air smelled like dried wheat, rust, and history. Everything looked the same, but I wasn't. The barn was already half decorated, paper lanterns strung along the rafters, tables draped in blue gingham, centerpieces of sunflowers and dried corn husks. A celebration of heritage, a facade of unity. Inside, I heard voices, Dad's, loud, confident. Tara's laugh, sharp and brittle, Mason's muttering, a low hum behind it all. I didn't walk in, not yet. I stood just outside the door, listening. By this time next week, Dad said, we'll be free of the wait. Green Acres closes fast. 60 days to vacate. Vacate. The word struck something deep. Not move, not transition. Vacate. Like sweeping out a building after a fire. Tara chimed in. Do we know who the contact is? Dad's voice dropped. Only a name. Ben Carver. Legal proxy. Might be a front, who knows? Long as the check clears. Ben Carver. I clenched my jaw. That was the name on the contract, the identity we'd set up through my legal team. He was fiction. But the power behind him? Very real. I stepped back, heart pounding. They had no idea. They were celebrating the sale of their legacy, to me. And when I walked into that barn tomorrow, they'd still smile like they'd won something. But tonight I wasn't ready for smiles. I needed space, to think, to breathe. I walked down the path behind the barn, past the field fence, toward the hill that overlooked the creek. The air was cooler there, quiet except for the faint rustling of leaves. I sat on the old bench Roy had built when I was a kid. The wood had cracked with age, but it held my weight. I pulled the contract from my bag and laid it across my lap. The ink had dried weeks ago, but tomorrow it would burn like fire in that barn. I thought about the voicemail from Tara, the text from Mason, the silence from Dad. None of them saw me. Not really. And yet every move they made now was being pulled by strings they didn't know I held. As the sky shifted from pale to charcoal, I closed my eyes and whispered into the wind. They think I'll just take it lying down. Let them, because tomorrow they won't know what hit them. The morning of the reunion arrived with air thick as syrup. Kansas humidity wrapped itself around my skin the second I stepped outside, heavy with the scent of sunburned grass and sweet tea left too long in the sun. The sky was the kind of washed-out blue that always looked harmless until it cracked open at dusk. But today, the storm wasn't in the sky, it was in me. Inside the barn, the party had already begun. The space buzzed with bodies and laughter. Cousins I barely remembered, family friends who only ever asked what I was up to these days. A country playlist played low through Dad's old speakers. Boots stomped along to a beat I no longer moved to. I stayed near the entrance, letting the scent of sawdust and diesel mix with the burnt tang of grilled brisket wafting from the smoker outside. The decorations were the same, Burlap ribbons, white string lights, sunflower centerpieces, but the energy was different. It felt final. I glanced toward the stage Dad had built himself when we were kids. Back then it held hay bales and birthday cakes. Today it held the end of everything they thought they owned. Dad stood tall under the lights, chest puffed, button-down pressed, like he'd ironed it with pride. Tara hovered close by, perfect in her sundress, sipping sweet wine with the confidence of someone already spending money she hadn't received. Mason leaned against the wall, smirking at something on his phone. They looked like royalty, basking in the glow of what they thought was victory. I stood in the shadow of a support beam, fingers tightening around the leather strap of my purse. Inside, the contract rested, thick and still. I didn't need it yet. I needed the moment. Dad raised his hand, silencing the room. Conversations quieted, forks scraped against plates and then stilled. He cleared his throat, voice steady. "I want to thank y'all for coming today. It means a lot to have the whole family back here under this roof one last time." One last time. I heard the whisper ripple through the crowd. A few exchanged glances. Some nodded solemnly, already bracing for the blow. Dad smiled, soaking in the attention. "As you all know," he continued, "this farm has been in our family for generations, but times change, land prices rise, and it's time we stepped into the future." He paused for dramatic effect. It worked. "We've made the decision to sell." The silence was clean. No gasps, just the collective breath of people realizing a page had turned. Tara clapped first. Mason followed. Others joined. I didn't move. Dad looked straight at me then. Not through me. At me. "We're selling the farm. You get nothing, Lila." His words struck sharper the second time. Not because they hurt more, but because they confirmed it. He'd meant every syllable. And still, I smiled. Slow. Measured. Not kind. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the clapping like glass across concrete. "Who's the buyer?" The room quieted again. He puffed his chest, clearly thrilled by the chance to brag. "Green Acres," he said. "They're paying $57 million. His words rang out with the same weight as a verdict. Tara's grin widened. Mason whooped. I took a step forward. One beat, two. Then I laughed. Just once. Low, controlled. Then I looked him in the eye. "Dad, I am Green Acres." The room didn't just fall silent. It stopped breathing. I felt the shift like a shockwave. Every head turned. Every smirk dropped. Tara's wineglass tilted in her hand. Mason's mouth hung open. Even Dad blinked once, slow, like his brain needed a minute to catch up. "What?" he asked, almost a whisper. "I'm the buyer," I said, louder now, each word sharp. "The contract's been signed for weeks, through a proxy. That $57 million you're so proud of, it's mine." I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, the hum of the overhead lights, the creak of someone shifting on the old floorboards. Dad stepped down from the stage, his boots heavy against the wood. "You're lying," he said, jaw tight. "Check the contract," I said, pulling the folder from my purse. "Look for the name Ben Carver. You've been speaking to my team for months." He didn't take it. He didn't have to. Tara stepped forward instead, snatching the folder from my hands. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp, tearing through the pages like they might explode. Her face drained of color. "She's not lying," she whispered. Mason looked between us, lost. How? You don't even want the farm." I turned to him slowly. "I didn't," I said, "but I wanted the choice. I wanted you all to see what it feels like to be left out of something that belonged to you." Dad's face twisted, part fury, part disbelief. "You can't do this," he growled. "I already did." He stepped closer, voice rising. "This isn't just land. This is our blood, our history." "It's mine too," I snapped. "You just never treated it that way." He opened his mouth to speak, but stopped. The silence stretched thin, tight as a tripwire. Somewhere in the back of the room, someone let out a stunned breath. I stood there, heart pounding. Not from fear, from release, from knowing I'd finally cracked the mask he'd worn my entire life. But before anyone could speak again, before the dust could settle, a sound broke through. The back doors swung open with a sudden bang. A man in a dark jacket stepped in, holding a folder, eyes sharp, expression unreadable. Edward Harper? He asked. Dad turned slowly. Who's asking? The man flashed a badge. Detective Samuels. I have a few questions about your financial records. And just like that, the room spun again. The barn, once buzzing with forced cheer and cheap wine, had turned stone-cold quiet. Detective Samuels stood just inside the door, his badge catching a glint of the overhead lanterns. No one moved, not even Dad. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. What's this about? Samuels flipped open the folder in his hand, eyes skimming down. I'd rather speak somewhere private. The silence snapped. I've got nothing to hide, Dad said, his arms crossed, voice a notch louder than it needed to be. Say what you came to say. I felt it before I heard it, my stomach tightening like it knew something I didn't, the same way it used to clench when I was 12 and someone knocked on the front door during dinner. Samuels didn't flinch. We've been reviewing financial activity related to a group of agricultural properties in this region. A pattern emerged: high cash influx, short-term mortgage swaps, unexplained shell payments. Tara blinked. What does that have to do with us? Samuels looked directly at her. Your family farm showed up, multiple times. Dad's fists clenched at his sides. Mason's mouth moved, but nothing came out. I stepped forward. Are you accusing him of something? Samuels tilted his head. Not yet, but we'd like to understand why a nearly insolvent farm suddenly cleared 6 figures in back payments without any disclosed lender. Dad shifted. His voice dropped. We've got investors. Samuels raised an eyebrow. Then I'll need names, dates, contracts. I watched Dad closely. His lips parted, then shut, and for the first time in my life, I saw it. Fear. Not the kind that comes from losing money, the kind that comes from being seen. Tara looked at me. You didn't? I didn't answer. Not because I was hiding, but because I wanted them to squirm in the silence the way I had for years. Samuels closed the folder and handed Dad a card. I'll be in town for a few days. I suggest you cooperate. He turned and left, his boots echoing down the barn ramp. No one spoke. The air felt thick, like we were all breathing smoke no one could see. Dad finally broke the tension. He's fishing. Doesn't have anything. Mason stepped forward. What if he finds the shell company? Tara shot him a look. Shut up. I stayed still, letting them spiral, letting the cracks show. Dad pointed a finger at me. You started this. I didn't move. I gave you a chance to be honest. I protected this family, he growled. Everything I did, every deal, I did to keep us alive. No, I said, calm but cold. You did it to keep control. His face twitched, a flicker of something old and ugly. Tara stepped in. We need to get ahead of this. If he's digging, we need a lawyer. Dad cut her off. We're fine. The sale will go through. We'll take the money and disappear. I stepped forward, slow and steady. You're not getting a dime, Tara snapped. You don't have that kind of power. I met her eyes. I do. The contract allows for a full hold and delay clause if fraud is suspected. Clause 17C. I wrote it. Dad's face went pale. You've been watching us, Mason muttered. This whole time. No, I said. I've been surviving you. The words sat in the air like a loaded gun. Dad turned away. This isn't over. I didn't respond, because I knew he was right. Later that night, I sat in my office back in Kansas City. The city lights flickered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, soft and distant. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. The folder Samuels left on my desk sat unopened beside my laptop. I stared at it, fingers hovering, then slowly flipped it open. Inside was a single sheet, a ledger, a payment trail, and a note, handwritten. There's more to this farm's story than debts. I ran my hand over the paper. My heart thudded against my ribs. There, at the bottom, was a payment entry I didn't recognize. 3 years ago. Amount $40,000. Sender, R.H. Trust, Roy Harper. My chest tightened. Uncle Roy had been gone for years. No contact, no explanation. And yet, here he was. I stood up abruptly, chair scraping hard against the floor. I crossed the room to my filing cabinet, yanked open the bottom drawer. Buried beneath contracts and invoices was an old envelope I'd almost forgotten about, yellowed, creased at the corners. Roy had handed it to me the last time I saw him. said nothing, just pressed it into my hand and muttered, "Keep this safe. Your dad won't like it." I never opened it, until now. I peeled back the flap with shaking hands. Inside, a single photograph, faded, torn at the edges. Dad, standing next to a man I didn't recognize, and in the background, barely visible, was a for sale sign on the edge of the Harper property, dated 6 months before Grandpa died. But Grandpa had never signed anything, or so we'd been told. I flipped the photo over. On the back, Roy's handwriting. He forged it. You know what to do. I stood there, frozen, breath shallow. What was Dad hiding? What had Roy tried to protect? And why? Did this feel like just the beginning? It happened last year, just as the first cold snap rolled over the hills. Leaves had browned, curled, and fallen like confessions. The barn roof had started leaking again, and Dad was already muttering about how nothing lasts unless you beat it into shape. I'd come back for a weekend visit, one of those tension-filled, eye-contact-avoiding check-ins that never really felt like coming home. Mom had made her usual too-salty casserole. Tara barely looked up from her phone. Dad kept steering conversation back to weather patterns and diesel costs, like that was safer than asking me anything real. Roy showed up uninvited. I remember hearing his old pickup rumble up the drive, windows down, radio too loud, that familiar screech of brakes that always arrived a half-second too late. He looked older, grayer, like the wind had been punching him in the face for a few years straight. But he smiled when he saw me. A real smile, the kind that doesn't need to be earned. "Lila," he said, stepping onto the porch, the wood groaning under his boots. "Got a minute?" We didn't go inside. Instead, we sat on the edge of the porch, legs hanging over like we used to when I was a kid. The sky was bruising to dusk. Crickets were just beginning their nightly argument. He didn't ask how I was. He just reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sealed envelope, held it out like it weighed more than it looked. "You keep this safe," he said. "Don't open it yet, and whatever you do, don't tell your dad you have it." My fingers hesitated before taking it. Why? He stared out at the horizon for a long time before answering. "Because there are things buried on this land that don't grow back if you dig them up wrong." I turned it over in my hands. "What's inside?" Roy stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Let's just say, your dad ain't the only Harper who knows how to lie." And just like that, he walked off. He never came back. After that night, Roy disappeared. No calls, no Christmas card, not even gossip from neighbors about seeing him at the grain elevator. It was like he'd stepped off the map. I kept the envelope in my desk drawer, untouched. Until now. The photo I'd found in Samuel's file haunted me. Dad beside a stranger. A for sale sign behind them, months before Grandpa's death. And Roy's note scrawled on the back. He forged it. You know what to do. I finally slid open the envelope with the edge of my thumb. Inside, another photo, this one older, blurred, a document, some kind of will, Grandpa's name on the header, but the signature, it looked shaky, off, slanted like someone had tried too hard to copy an angle they didn't own. Folded behind it, a single scrap of paper, 2 words, block letters, all caps. "Check the safe." I sat back, breath shallow. The safe. I hadn't thought about it in years. It was hidden behind the false back panel in Dad's office bookshelf. I'd stumbled across it once when I was a teenager, snooping for Christmas presents. It looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Back then, I thought it held cash. Now, I wasn't so sure. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I drove, past the silos, past the place where Grandpa used to sit and whittle wood into nothing, past the line of trees where Roy once dared me to build a rope swing I never finished. By the time I reached the farmhouse, the sun was just beginning to stretch over the fields. Dad's truck wasn't in the driveway. Clara's sedan sat parked under the tree like it always had, half covered in leaves and neglect. I knocked anyway. She opened the door in a pale blue robe, eyes tired. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "I thought you were done with us," she said. I didn't answer that. "I need to look in Dad's office," I said instead. She didn't stop me. The house smelled the same. Lemon cleaner, old carpet, and something faintly metallic, like time trying to warn you away. Inside the office, dust floated in beams of morning light. The shelves still sagged with outdated manuals on crop rotation and tax law. I ran my hand along the middle shelf, then knocked twice. The hollow thud answered me. I pulled back the panel. The safe door glared up at me, heavy and silent. I tried the knob. It didn't budge. I was about to step back when Clara appeared behind me. "His birthday," she said quietly. I turned to her. "Try it. Month and day, no year." I entered it. 2 turns left, 1 right. The click echoed like thunder. Inside was a stack of folders, some bank statements, deeds, and at the very bottom, a sealed manila envelope marked Roy, copy. I took it out with both hands, heart pounding. Clara didn't say a word. She just nodded once and walked away. I opened the envelope on the floor. Inside was a legal will, dated 2 months before Grandpa's death, and in clear, uneven handwriting, Grandpa had left the land. To Roy, not to Edward, and certainly not to any of us. I stared at the page, the world spinning beneath me. Dad had rewritten history, claimed the farm as his, cut Roy out, buried the truth. And everyone, me, Tara, Mason, had lived under a lie built into our very soil. I folded the papers back, fingers trembling. Suddenly, the floorboards creaked behind me. I turned fast. No one was there. But a shadow shifted just beyond the hallway. Had Dad come back early? I grabbed the envelope and stuffed it into my bag, because whatever was coming next, I needed to be ready. I stared at the envelope on my desk, the edges still warm from the heat of my grip. My bag sat open beside it, Roy's will tucked just beneath a stack of invoices, as if it weren't a bomb ready to explode everything. Outside the window, the city moved as if none of this mattered, horns blaring, a kid on a bike dodging traffic, someone arguing on speakerphone in the alley below. But here, in my office, everything was silent. I tapped the desk. Once, twice, a nervous tick I hadn't done in years. I pulled up the Harper account, all the ledgers, all the quiet transfers, my own digital fingerprints hidden under layers of shell companies, emergency wires, and ghost LLCs. $200,000. That's what I'd sent them over the last 2 years. Little lifelines strung together like barbed wire. Every month, like clockwork, I paid just enough to keep them afloat, to keep the bank from foreclosing, to keep Dad from drowning. But this time, I hovered over the transfer button and didn't click. The due payment was sitting in queue, $9,734.41. The farm's fuel and loan interest. It was supposed to go out this morning, and I just didn't. The cursor blinked at me like it was daring me to flinch, but I didn't. Instead, I opened my business account and changed the status to canceled. It was done. No more safety net, no more quiet support, no more invisible lifeline. They were going to feel the fall. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under me. But instead of relief, all I felt was the shake in my fingertips. Because the truth was, cutting the cord didn't feel triumphant. It felt like stepping off the edge of something I'd been clinging to for years. A part of me still wanted to believe that if I saved them enough, if I kept things patched together long enough, maybe, just maybe, they'd turn around and see me. But they never would. And maybe that was the scariest thing of all. The buzz of my phone snapped the moment in half. Tara. I let it ring. Then Mason. I answered. His voice came in fast, frantic. "What did you do?" I stayed quiet. "We just got a call from the bank. They said the account bounced, that we're delinquent. Dad's freaking out." I looked at the empty glass on my desk and watched the last drop of condensation slide down the side. "I stopped paying for your mess," I said. Mason's breath hitched. "You've got to be kidding." "You wanted me out," I cut in. "Now I am." He paused. "You don't understand. If the bank files, we lose everything." I let the silence settle. He added, softer now. "Lila, please." Something cracked, not because I believed he cared, but because of how quickly panic replaced pride in his voice. "How long have you known?" I asked. He didn't respond. "How long have you known it was me funding the farm?" "Since last winter." I felt the burn behind my eyes. That long, they'd known, and they still let Dad humiliate me at the reunion. Still watched him say, "You get nothing," and said nothing. "Tell Dad I'm done," I said, voice flat. "He can find someone else to bleed dry." I hung up. My hand was shaking again. I stood, walked to the window, pressed my palm to the cool glass. Below, the world kept spinning. Later that evening, the silence broke again. This time it was Tara. Her voice cracked like glass under strain. "What the hell did you do, Lila?" I didn't have energy for the performance. "I stopped carrying the weight." "You don't get to decide that," I almost laughed. "I just did. He's your father. No, he's your shield, your bank, your version of God, not mine. He's going to lose the farm. Then maybe he'll finally know what it feels like." She went quiet. Then, "You're a coward." "No," I whispered. "I just got tired of saving people who never planned to save me." I hung up again. This time I turned my phone off. I needed space, silence, the kind I used to find in the attic where no one came looking, where the floor groaned under secrets and dust swallowed sound. I curled up on the couch in my office, arms wrapped around myself like armor. The glow from the laptop screen still lit the room in cold blue. I thought of Roy, of the will, of Grandpa's name scratched in shaky ink and the betrayal buried beneath it. They built their legacy on lies, and I'd funded every rotten beam of it, but not anymore. Now they would feel what I'd felt my entire life, alone, unheard, unprotected. The next morning I was pouring coffee when my office line rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. Tara's voice came through, breathless. "You need to turn on the news." I flipped open my laptop, fingers stiff. There it was, local news. Front page, Harper family farm faces foreclosure after fraud investigation escalates. The subhead burned into my chest. Sources cite irregular bank activity, potential forged deeds. Investigation linked to Edward Harper. I sank into my chair. The fall had begun, and I had just pulled the last thread. I knew he'd show up. What I didn't expect was how early. He didn't knock. Didn't wait in the lobby like a man with shame. He walked straight into my office like it still belonged to him. Edward Harper, red-faced, breathing like a bull, fists clenched so hard his knuckles had gone ghost white. He slammed the door behind him. The glass shook. "You cut the funds," he said. I didn't move. Just sat there at my desk, fingers lightly grazing the ceramic edge of my coffee mug. "Good morning, Dad." He ignored that. Marched straight up to my desk and planted both hands on the surface like he might flip the whole thing over. "You think you're clever? You think this little stunt is going to break me?" The mug rattled against the wood. I didn't flinch. "I think," I said quietly, "you already broke yourself." He leaned in. "You pull this now? With the bank crawling up our backs and a damn detective asking questions about deeds?" I locked eyes with him. "You mean the forged ones?" For a beat, the room went still. Then his jaw tensed. "You think you know everything, huh?" "No," I said, "but I know enough." He straightened, pacing now like a caged animal looking for a crack in the wall. Then he pivoted. "Tara and Mason," he said. "They'll be ruined if this goes public. You cut the money, they lose everything." I stood. "You're not here because you care about them," I said. "You're here because I stopped giving you control." He stepped closer. "I built that farm. I carried this family through droughts, storms, bad seasons, while you were off pretending in your little city office. You stole it from your brother," I snapped. "You lied to everyone. You built your legacy out of paper and threats." He didn't deny it. Instead, he said, "Restore the payments, now." I tilted my head. "Or what?" "I'll cut Tara and Mason out," he said. "I'll destroy them, their credit, their careers. I'll make sure they beg in the dirt before I ever let you win." There it was. Not a plea, not regret, just leverage. "You'd do that to your own children?" His face twisted. "I've done worse." And somehow, I believed him. The silence between us pressed against my chest like a closing door. "Get out," I said. He didn't move. Then, a soft knock. Clara. She opened the door, eyes flicking between us. "Edward," she said, voice tight. "Stop it." He spun. "Stay out of this." She didn't blink. "Stop trying to control her," she said, stepping inside. Her voice was soft but firm. "It's over." His mouth opened, then closed, and I saw it, just for a second. The flash of something small behind his rage. Fear. Clara turned to me. "I'm sorry," she said, and it hit harder than I expected, because she'd never said it before, not once. Dad stormed out. The door slammed, and just like that, He was gone. For now. I sank into my chair, letting my hands fall into my lap. They trembled. Clara stayed quiet, watching me like she wasn't sure if she should sit or leave. "I never knew," she finally said, "about the money, about any of it." "You never asked," I replied. She nodded slowly. "That's on me." Then she pulled something from her purse, a small envelope. "I found this, tucked in one of Roy's old books." She placed it on my desk. I waited until she left to open it. Inside, a copy of a letter from Roy, addressed to Grandpa. The ink was faded, but the meaning was clear. He had tried to come forward, tried to stop Edward before the will was changed. But something had silenced him, a name at the bottom of the letter, scribbled like an afterthought. Clara. I stared at it, throat tight. Had she known? Or was it a coincidence? I didn't know what scared me more, the possibility that she'd been a part of it, or that she hadn't done anything to stop it. Later that night, I sat in the dark of my apartment staring out at the city lights. The world buzzed below me, horns, music, life. But in my head, only one thing echoed. Is this worth losing them all? Tara, Mason, even Clara, was taking the truth all the way to the edge worth torching the last thread of connection I had left? My phone buzzed. A message from Samuels. "Meet me tomorrow. There's more you need to see." I stared at it. The truth was close now, and once it came out, there'd be no going back. Detective Samuels met me just after sunrise. We stood outside the old diner near the edge of town, steam curling from our coffee cups, the parking lot half empty and damp from an early morning drizzle. The sky was still undecided, clouds grumbling low, but the light just soft enough to make the world look like it hadn't broken yet. Samuels handed me a file. No words, just a look that said, "You're not going to like this, but you asked." I flipped it open, fingers cold despite the coffee. Photocopies, signatures, legal filings, and there it was, blacked and whited into existence. My father had forged Grandpa's deed, every page stacked against him. Old land transfer forms, 2 notarized signatures that didn't match. A deed that had been updated 3 weeks after Grandpa passed, except the notary had been dead 2 months by then. I held the page with both hands. The weight of it landed in my chest, heavy and final. "He knew this would come out eventually," Samuel said, voice low. "I think he thought he could outrun it." Samuels nodded. "He's been under review for weeks. Your financial trail only sped things up. And Roy? He left enough paper behind to start a fire." A long silence. "I need to show them," I said. "All of them." "You sure about that?" he asked. "This changes everything. I'm counting on it." The barn was already half full when I arrived. I'd sent the text early that morning. Tara, Mason, Clara. No explanations, just a time and a place. And now they were here, waiting. Tara sat stiffly near the front, hands curled around her phone like it might save her. Mason stood against the back wall, arms crossed, avoiding my eyes. Clara hovered near a support beam, eyes wide and red-rimmed, as if she'd been expecting a funeral. Dad hadn't shown up yet, but I knew he would. I stepped up to the makeshift platform, the same one he'd stood on weeks ago when he told me I was getting nothing. I held the folder tight, the truth inside. "I want to talk about the land," I began, voice even, "about what it really cost." No one moved. I've spent years trying to understand how we ended up like this, fractured, bitter, afraid to admit the damage. I thought maybe if I just worked harder, or gave more, or stayed quiet long enough, we'd be okay. I looked at each of them. But this place, the way we've been living, it's been a lie, and I'm not willing to carry it anymore. I opened the folder, held up the forged deed. Grandpa left the land to Roy. Gasps. A dropped coffee cup. Silence after. This, I held it up higher, was forged after Grandpa died, by Dad. Tara shot up. "No, that's not... He wouldn't..." Mason stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "You're lying." "I'm not." I turned to them. "The notary listed on the update, he was already dead. The signature on Grandpa's original will, verified. Roy was the rightful heir. Dad took it, hid it, rewrote the story, and we've all been living in it." Clara covered her mouth. Her whole body shook. And then, footsteps. Boots on wood. Dad.
He stepped in from the side door like he'd known exactly when to arrive. Face unreadable, eyes fixed on me. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. I didn't blink. "I know exactly what I'm doing." "You think this makes you better than me?" His voice was sharper now, low and dangerous. "No," I said. "It makes me free." He looked at the others, his audience, his kingdom cracking. "Tara Mason, she's trying to tear this family apart." "No," I said, "you did that." I turned to them, voice rising. "He used me, took my money, let me save the farm in secret while he planned to sell it behind my back. He forged the deed, buried the truth, and every time I tried to speak up, he reminded me of my place." Dad's face turned red. "You don't know what it was like, watching Roy take everything, watching your own father overlook you again and again." My breath caught. This wasn't about money, it was about legacy, about being chosen, and not being able to stand it when you weren't. "You did the same thing to me," I said quietly. Silence. Clara stepped forward, slow and unsure. "Edward," she said, voice shaking. "Is it true?" He didn't answer. Tara looked at him, eyes wide with something between horror and confusion. "Dad?" Still nothing. Mason turned, stormed out the back, and Dad lunged. He moved fast, rage surging through him like it had been caged too long, but I didn't move. I stood there, still holding the folder as if it were a shield. He stopped inches from me, breathing hard, face twisted, but he didn't touch me. He couldn't. I looked him straight in the eye. "You're done." He stared back, wild, lost. And then he stepped back, stumbled, turned, and walked out. Tara stood frozen. Clara sobbed. The room was broken open, but for the first time, I wasn't the one bleeding. I held the folder against my chest. The truth was out. But what came next? I had no idea. The lake was still that morning, not glassy, more like velvet. Dark, soft, quiet, the kind of stillness that feels earned. I stood at the edge, boots in dew-wet grass, the rising sun splitting gold across the water. Cicadas buzzed lazily in the distance, and a heron cut low across the far bank, wings slow and wide like it had nowhere else to be. The farm was behind me now, what remained of it. Clara had moved in with a cousin 2 towns over. Tara had disappeared into silence, which was probably her version of shock. Mason sent me a text the day after Dad left. Just 2 words. "You win." But it didn't feel like a win. Not exactly. It felt like standing on ground that had been scorched, and finally started to cool. I unclenched my hands, letting them fall to my sides. The folder with Roy's name was back at the office, sealed in a fireproof safe. It wouldn't save the farm now, but it would protect its truth. I hadn't spoken to Dad since the confrontation. He'd vanished. No calls, no slamming doors, no drawn-out apologies. Just gone. And somehow, that was fitting. He left the way he'd always handled consequences, quietly, after making sure someone else cleaned up the mess. I took a breath, let the damp air fill my lungs. Then I heard a car door behind me, gravel under tires, a slow engine fade, footsteps in grass. I didn't turn, but I knew who it was. "Lila!" Roy's voice had more gravel than I remembered, like age had settled in his throat and stayed there. I turned slowly, eyes locking on the one man I never thought I'd see again. He stood there in a faded denim jacket, hair thinner, eyes still sharp beneath tired lids. I didn't speak, didn't trust my voice yet. "I got your message," he said, his hand resting on the roof of the truck like he needed the ground to stop moving. "Didn't think you'd ever come looking." "I didn't know you were still alive," I said. He smiled, thin and crooked. "That was by design." I stepped closer, the wind lifting the hem of my coat. "Why now?" "Because you burned it down," he said. "And now, it might finally grow back right." He pulled something from his pocket, an envelope. He handed it to me like it was sacred. I opened it slowly. Inside, another copy of Grandpa's will, the one I'd already seen, but this time it had a cover letter, signed, dated, addressed to me. Grandpa had written it before he passed. "Roy insisted we leave it with you," he said he always knew you were the one who'd fight for it. My throat tightened. "I'm sorry I left you alone in it," Roy added. I nodded. Just once. Then I sat down in the grass, the envelope in my lap. Roy joined me, knees creaking as he folded to the earth. For a while, neither of us said anything. The sun kept climbing. The water stayed still. And something in me, the part that had always been curled tight like a fist, finally began to unfurl. I turned to him. "What do I do with it now?" He looked out across the lake. "You plant something better." Later that afternoon, I walked the land again. Not the house, not the broken fences, just the land. I took off my boots, let my feet sink into the mud, soft and warm. I thought about the girl who used to sit in the attic, cradling secrets in her hands like maybe they'd someday bloom. And now here I was, the one who held the truth, the one who watched them fall, the one who stayed. I didn't burn it out of spite. I did it so nothing like that could grow again. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that silence protects the wrong people. And sometimes you don't find peace by forgiving. You find it by finally saying enough. I never got the apology I wanted, but I got the freedom I needed, and that was everything. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this story resonated with you, hit subscribe, tap like, and share it with someone who might need it. Drop your own family stories or thoughts in the comments. I read them all. And don't miss our next story. It's one you won't forget.